going to throw. One-on-one. Davis has it. Touchdown. Carolina wins. Carolina is the Coastal Division champion. Javonte Williams to the left of Howell. He'll send him out into the flat right side. Howell looking, standing tall, lets it go. Man there. Touchdown. Touchdown, Carolina. The pistol. Jackson behind him. Hands off to Jackson. He tried a jump pass, and it's intercepted. Surratt intercepts it. Holy cow, Carolina's going to win. And off to Javonte Williams again. Pops it to the left. Javonte leaps over a man, crosses the 50, trucks over a defender, spins by another. Goodness gracious, he's down to about the 15, and he did absolutely everything in one carry.
Here's the shotgun snap to Aguilar. Drops back. Pressure coming. Aguilar floats it up. Incomplete. No flags. Head on back up the mountain. Carolina wins it in double overtime. Loftus out of the shotgun. Throws to the end zone. Incomplete. Incomplete. The bell belongs to us. Carolina wins it. 47-45 in double overtime.
Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio is going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome into another edition of the Heel Tough Blog podcast coming at you on a Monday night. And once again, we have another commitment in the 2026 class to talk about here tonight. Carolina going and landing a guy that is only really best described as a jumbo athlete. And we'll kind of tell you what exactly we mean by that coming up here in this edition of the show. We have to also get you ready for the midweek visits that Carolina's having, and we got to check on where the recruiting class is at just overall for Carolina, because with 20 commitments already, 2 more visitors coming in midweek, and then eventually the final week of visits coming up for Carolina, this class starting to shape up pretty well for Carolina already. Where, does Carolina, have they filled their needs? And we talked about on the last edition some of the areas that still are needs for Carolina, but we're going to just take a look at where the class is at right now, the 20 commitments that Carolina has, and where everybody stands. And so let's jump into it. The 20th commitment that Carolina landed on the 2026 class. This, as first reported earlier today by Inside Carolina, is Aveon Williams. And he is the guy that committed while he was on his official visit this past weekend. So he was in Chapel Hill over the weekend, probably sometime, I would assume on Sunday morning, but it could have happened anytime before that as well. While he was on this visit, he does end up revealing to the staff that he is going to commit to them. And so Carolina gets a 6'6", 245-pound athlete that can play both sides of the ball. He did this past year at Casa Grande Union High School in Casa Grande, Arizona. This past season caught 36 passes for 771 yards and 11 touchdowns out of the tight end spot, while also racking up 12 total tackles, 5.5 tackles for loss, and 4 sacks in limited reps on the defensive side of the football. He was named a first-team all-region member at tight end and an honorable mention along the defensive line. The year prior, as a sophomore, he caught 34 passes for 452 yards and 8 touchdowns offensively, and then finished with 25 total tackles, 11 tackles for loss, and 4 sacks in what was a more expansive role for him on the defensive side of the ball. But this is a guy who Carolina, brings in really, again, it is the height, weight, and speed combination. That is really what they're looking for. Guys that have their measurables. Now the question is, will they be able to grow into those measurables? That's going to be where Carolina is hoping that having Bill Belichick, they will be able to coach that out of some of these guys. And Williams really is no different. very interesting player, to say the least, when you watch on film, because, this one, I think when you look at him and you think about some of the other guys that Carolina's recruited at the tight end position, Cooper McCutcheon is a little bit different. I think he's more of that thinner, more of a consistent receiving threat you're hoping throughout his career, where this is a guy that you would think immediately, okay, 6'6", 245 pounds, this dude has to be a great blocker. The weird part is that you don't really see that a lot on his film. And that's an area that I think you still question with him, and we're going to have to figure out whether or not he can actually block. Where this guy shines really is as a pass catcher, and really after he catches the football. That's the area where he really shines, because at 6'6", 245 pounds, this dude is running through everybody. I mean, he is absolutely destroying people after the catch. I mean, throwing guys aside, dragging defenders with him. I mean, there were a couple of clips where they had him by the legs and he was trying to drag defenders with him for a good 5 or 6 seconds before anybody else was able to come over and help bring him to the ground. So, I mean, this is a guy that I think really fits the mold of when you saw Kendra Harrison, that Carolina was trying to go after, the 5-star tight end out of the state that is going to Oregon. This is basically the lesser version of him. I think that's basically what Carolina is getting here. Lesser version by that, I mean, not really as polished. I think there's some areas that he's going to have to clean up as he goes to the next level, especially as a route runner. I think that route tree is pretty limited, and a lot of the stuff really just comes easy to him because of his size. I do think that's something that is going to have to change a little bit at the next level, but I do think this is basically what they went out and got him for, because he is just a monster and is a guy that if you can develop him as a route runner, and if he can prove that he is consistent enough with his hands, which he looks like he has pretty strong and reliable hands, judging by some of the tough catches that he has to make on film, then I think you've got something here. And that's what Carolina is really hoping for. Pretty good with the 50-50 balls as well. At that size, you would hope that he is not the most, explosive in terms of his jump into the air. But I do think that he does do a good job of high pointing the football and coming down with it when it comes to those 50-50 scenarios. So I think this is definitely a guy that, Carolina really looks at and feels like he is a piece of clay that they can mold into something at that tight end position. I feel like that's probably where they look at him, because when you go over to the defensive side of the ball, I mean, look, there is some promise here. There's no doubt about that. He has some nice reps standing up or with his hand in the dirt while getting after the quarterback, and his length really does a good job of altering those passing lanes. His motor, not a question at all. Just, again, fitting the mold of Carolina, commitments in this class and towards the end of that 2025 class, where these are guys that have the size and speed, size, weight, speed, and have the motor. There's no question about that. You're never going to question whether or not these guys are playing to the whistle, and that's exactly what he brings. The problem is that he isn't overly physical. That's an area of his game that I think you kind of surprises you and you want to see improve. I do think maybe not improve, but I think you want to see it come out of him more, because I think when you see it after the catch, that's an area where he really shines. But then you look at it and say, why was he not more of a blocking tight end? Why are there not more blocking highlights on his film? And then when you go over to the defensive side, you just don't see near the physicality that he needs to. Part of that is probably because he doesn't necessarily need it. With his long arms, he's able to shed blocks pretty easily because guys simply aren't able to get their hands on him. But at this next level, you're going to be going up against guys that are the same size as you. Some of them could be 6'7", 6'8", that have the same arm length that you do. It's going to make it a lot more difficult for you to be able to win those reps just based on your size, as opposed to having to bring a physical edge to it or be able to bring the speed off the edge. To be honest with you, his speed is actually one of his better attributes. I do think that the acceleration is there at times. He has pretty decent closing speed once he gets free of a block and is able to close in on the quarterback. but it's not nearly where it needs to be right off the line of scrimmage, I think, to have an effect as an edge rusher. You're going to need to see that acceleration, that burst off the line of scrimmage improve if he is going to stay on that side of the ball. But I think speed-wise overall, if you look at some of the reps that he has as a tight end, I do really like how he is able to pull away from some of these guys in the open field. So I do think that he is someone that Carolina probably feels pretty good about. They feel like he's someone who's going to be able to affect that offensive side of the ball if he can grow in certain areas. I think that's probably where Carolina is going to look at him at. And if that is the case, well, then Carolina has 2 commitments at the tight end position. And that means that they should be done in this class for tight ends. And I think they probably are. When you look around at the other tight ends that Carolina was considering, a lot of them Carolina is now out of the running for, including Landon Meary, who made it official. Did not look like he made his official visit to Chapel Hill earlier this month, where he was supposed to visit in the middle of the first week that Carolina was able to host guys on campus. Doesn't look like he made that visit. Kakua Amua, who Carolina brought in during that first official visit weekend, he ended up committing to Florida after he went there and visited officially on June 6th. Not shocking. I told you going into that one that I thought that was where he was probably leaning. And then there's Carson Snead. That's the only other guy that I think Carolina is probably looking at right now. J.C. Anderson, who comes from Mount Zion High School out in Mount Zion, Illinois. He was supposed to be one of the guys that was supposed to be on campus here in the middle of this week, but it appears he's canceled that official visit. That would probably line up with Carolina landing Aveon Williams. That probably means that they are telling people that they are done at the position. But Carson Snead is probably a guy that if he is willing to come to Carolina, they would be willing to take him on. Now, he has taken official visits to Ole Miss and to Florida, does have an official visit that's coming up this weekend with Tennessee, and many people believe that he is going to stick with his commitment to Tennessee at this time. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not he does look elsewhere, and if he does, if Carolina is even remotely involved in that search elsewhere. But right now, it feels like they're probably done at the tight end position with Cooper McCutcheon as well as Aveon Williams now on board with them. So now the question becomes, where exactly does Carolina's 2026 recruiting class stand? I feel like they're in a pretty good spot. You look at where they're at in terms of the number of commitments with 20 already. Really, the areas that Carolina's hit the hardest is defensive line and offensive line. 5 offensive linemen that they've landed so far. We've told you most of those guys listed as interior offensive linemen, but still trying to figure out where exactly some of those guys are ultimately going to slot in. And then you go to the defensive line, where Carolina's got 6 defensive line commits. You've got 2 edge rushers. You've got a guy in Jimmy Frisco, Alo Suliafau, who looks like he's going to play more of that defensive end spot, where you're going to see Bryce Yates this year. You're going to see some of Carolina's bigger edge rushers play with his height and weight being 6'3", 265 pounds, would slot in almost perfectly there, as opposed to when you look at guys like Xavier Griffin Haynes at 6'6", 235, and Ashton Blatt at 6'4", 230 pounds. And then you got a couple other defensive linemen that Carolina's landed already so far in this class, with David Jackson, who was just on campus this past weekend. Of course, you've got the big man, Trayshawn Ruffin, who leads the class, is the headliner of this class so far, as a guy that's ranked inside of the top 300 at 6'2", 340 pounds. So this class is, in a good shape. It shows you that they are really focusing on 2 areas in particular. And defensive line, by the way, that number is at 5. Aveon Williams is being listed as a defensive lineman, so that's why it throws that number off just a little bit. Meanwhile, you got 2 receivers that Carolina's got already so far in this class, in Kamori Miles, as well as Jaden Jefferson. That's an area that I think Carolina still probably needs one more, as I told you the other night. Linebacker, Carolina with one commit there as of right now. Jaden Griffin-Haynes, still feel like that's an area where Carolina's got to look to find somebody. Defensive back, Carolina with just one defensive back commit at this point. And that's an area that I still think, I didn't mention it the other night, but safety still an area that Carolina could probably use somebody. The cornerback spot is definitely an area where Carolina can use somebody. They've got their quarterback. They're satisfied. I think they're running back. I feel like they're pretty satisfied with Crew Davis there. I know Carolina has taken a look at some other running backs, but it doesn't appear like any of those guys are going to make it to campus. The only other guy that I would keep an eye on is Messiah Mickens, a guy who is committed to Penn State, but of course has been looking around after his running back coach did end up leaving and heading to Notre Dame, but it feels like that it's probably one of those two schools that he's going to end up at. So Carolina looking like Crew Davis is going to be their guy that they're going to stick with. And got to tell you, one of my favorite players in this class, not a bad thing that they're sticking by his side and letting him be that guy there. And then special teams, Carolina with one commitment already on special teams in David Green. That's a guy that I think a kicker, probably sets up pretty well for him to come in and be able to compete next year at that position. So they're good at kicker. I doubt they're going to offer a scholarship spot to anybody else there. Don't see them. I know they've offered a couple of long snappers. Maybe there's one that ends up committing here at some point in the near future. I don't think they'll jump in there on the punter. I think that might be one of the areas where Carolina looks at a walk-on, but you never really know. So overall, this class in a pretty good shape. 20 commits so far, ranked 19th overall. Again, the biggest thing that I think they've got to do is they've got to find some of these headliners. And I think that's something that they are currently working on. They've found some of these guys that help to provide depth. They've found some of these guys that could end up being diamonds in the rough. But now you need some of these guys that just have the sheer talent. And we've talked about wide receiver being a position where hopefully they're going to be able to pull someone in that has a pretty high star ranking. We've looked at the defensive line as an area where Carolina can pull someone like that in. And the offensive line. Those are areas where I think Carolina, if they're going to end up landing some big names, those are the areas where they're probably going to be able to do it. And so hopefully we start to see those names roll in here as we go throughout the next few weeks and as we get into the month of July, where a lot of these decisions will be going down. I think those are probably the areas that you look at the most. I know safety is also a spot where Carolina has had a couple of different guys on campus that I think could end up being, pretty high-end 3 stars or potentially 4 stars. I think that's certainly where Carolina is looking to go as well at some point, is to potentially land one of those guys there. So it'll be really interesting to monitor this group over the next couple of weeks and really the next month, really couple of months, because there are some guys that have pushed their decisions back to August. We've seen this. Guys do this all the time. I know people were really reacting to Thomas Wilder pushing his recruitment back a little bit, pushing his commitment back to the 11th of August. I don't think that's necessarily anything to be concerned about. I think if anything, that may actually help Carolina, considering the fact that he was coming off a visit to Chapel Hill this weekend. I think that might show you that Carolina gave him a little something to think about. So who knows? It is going to be a crazy couple of months here as Carolina looks to try to really seal up this class. This is what it's become, guys. The summer is the most important time now, and it's part of the reason why I think many people want a summer signing period, just so you can go ahead and get these guys signed, because these classes are growing so big. Carolina has 20 commitments in the 2026 class right now. When you look at where that ranks in terms of total commitments, Carolina is tied for 6th. Penn State landed another commitment today, so they're actually tied with Carolina, tied for 6th. You've got Arkansas and Minnesota who have 21 commits. USF, the South Florida Bulls, with 22 commits. Rutgers with 23 commits. And USC, who already has 29 commits. I mean, those are numbers that you usually see when there is a coaching change. But again, remember that the roster sizes are bigger, and that's part of the reason why teams are taking on this many guys and taking them on as quickly as they are. So Carolina, I mean, they're in a pretty decent spot. I mean, you look at some of the rankings of some of those teams around them. I mean, they're relatively close to that. I mean, their average is pretty solid at an 87.4 according to 24/7 Sports composite team ranking. So not bad, not great in terms of the talent that they have, but that's why I said get those headliners in there and you'll be feeling really good about this class. Well, speaking of headliners, there are 2 of them that are going to be on campus this week. 2 guys that if Carolina was able to land, you feel pretty good about where Carolina would be at. It would really give Carolina some star power to this class. Both guys would become the top commit in the class if Carolina was able to land them. That's 4-star defensive lineman Carter Gooden out of Tabor Academy in Marion, Massachusetts, and 4-star linebacker Duyan Forkpaw Jr. out of IMG Academy. He originally comes from Buford, Georgia, but now, of course, is hailing from Bradenton, Florida, down there at one of the most exclusive schools in the country for high school football. We've heard how Bill Belichick wants to go down there and recruit these guys. This is another guy that, unfortunately, it doesn't seem like the connection to Carolina's staff is nearly as strong as maybe some of the guys that are going to be coming from IMG Academy. You know, if they came over the last few years, Billy Miller, the special teams assistant, of course, was the head coach there over the last few years. And unfortunately, this is a guy that I believe transferred there this offseason. So don't know if he necessarily has that strong a ties with Billy Miller, but if he does, that could potentially be a factor here for Carolina. Meanwhile, with Carter Gooden, you know, this is another guy out of the state of Massachusetts that Carolina, they've hit that state pretty hard so far in this recruiting cycle. And I know that this is definitely a spot in the country that with his history, Bill Belichick wants to be able to flex a little bit of muscle. And this is one that I am definitely hoping he's able to do that with. You know, we talked about how he was able to get Nick Fiamura out of there. That was one that I think was, you know, important for the offensive line. Definitely a guy that has, you know, sort of soared up the rankings ever since Carolina ended up landing him. This is another one where I feel like with Carter Gooden, there's not much to question here. You're just hoping that the fact that him, you know, being from the state of Massachusetts, hopefully growing up a Patriots fan, having watched Bill Belichick and what his teams were able to do up there, maybe that has some sort of impact because this guy is an elite defensive lineman, a guy that probably slots in somewhere. I would think, you know, looking at where he's at currently height and weight wise at 6'4", 260 pounds, I would look at him as someone that fits perfectly for that defensive end position that we talked about a little bit earlier, where we would see Alo Suafau as well as a guy like this year, Price Yates. But I mean, look, Carolina's got some really tough teams that they're battling for him. Penn State hosted him this past weekend. It feels like they did a pretty good job with him. Virginia hosted him the previous week. Michigan State also is on there. And then Boston College to close out his official visit schedule. That'll be this coming weekend. But Carolina, I think, has a shot here. I think because of the connection to Massachusetts, they do have the shot. But can they find a way to capitalize? Can they find a way to beat out him staying close to home with Boston College, or him possibly going to Penn State, a school that has a better track record than Carolina has? But do they have the track record that Bill Belichick has as a coach on their sidelines? Not necessarily. So we'll see how that battle ultimately ends up going. We'll keep you up to date on anything that comes out from those midweek visitors. We're going to have a quick preview for you guys. Since it's only the two guys, it'll be a really short one, and that'll come out tomorrow for you to update you on where things are at with their recruitments and where Carolina sort of sits with them heading into this week. So make sure you keep an eye on the website for that. Also, make sure you go back and read the commitment article of Aveon Williams. We would greatly appreciate if you did that. That was a big commitment for Carolina. I've got the film breakdown of both the offensive and defensive sides, go even a little more in depth than I went here. Also got his statistics in there for you guys to check out as well, if you didn't remember those ones that I read off to you earlier in the show. So, I mean, make sure you go back and check out all that great stuff that we've got on the website. A ton of recruiting stuff right now. But, of course, any news that comes out around the program, of course, you can go back, check out Bill Belichick's press conference takeaways from when he was talking to the media last Tuesday. That would be, the best place to go if you're looking for some updates on the current team and any other news that we have that comes out around the team here as we get closer and closer to the start of fall camp. We will, of course, keep you up to date on all of that. Meanwhile, on the basketball side of things starting to quiet down just a little bit. We're into the off season, but you know what that means? That means recruiting is going to start cranking up on the basketball side of things, particularly in that 2026 class. So make sure you're keeping an eye out. Carolina did offer a player today. Would expect that Josh will have something up on that here at some point. So make sure you keep an eye on the website for all of that. And of course, make sure you're keeping an eye out for the What If series that we're going to have on the podcast side of things for basketball. That'll be on the Four Corners podcast stream. So make sure you find that wherever you listen to your podcast. We would greatly appreciate if you gave that a subscription and left us a review. Same thing here for this podcast, the Hilltop Blog Podcast, where if you're listening to us and you're not subscribed yet, make sure you go over and do that. Meanwhile, on the social media side of things, head over to Heel Tough Blog on Twitter. Just search at Heel Tough Blog on Twitter and we will pop up right there. Give us a follow. Turn on those post notifications, because anytime that we post an article, an edition of the podcast, a live edition of the podcast gets retweeted, all of that stuff immediately comes to you guys. You'll get a notification and it'll pop up right on your phone. That's the best way to do it. You can also go over to our Facebook page, give us a like over there. If you do, that'll let you know whenever we go live with the live videos. It will not tell you whenever we post a new article. That will should pop up in your timeline, but it's not nearly as good as when you turn on those post notifications for Twitter. So that's the thing that we encourage you to do. And we encourage you to do that. If you want to follow us on our personal pages too, at HTB Anthony for me, at HTB_Josh for Josh, and at HackZubbard2 for Zach Hubbard. But, there you're going to get, to see a little more of the personal side of us, some of the other teams that we root for and everything like that. That's why we say that main Heel Tough blog page, we encourage you to follow that page. And then, of course, one other page that I have to add, I haven't been adding it here for a while. Go to at WFNZ on Twitter. Follow that. That is the radio station that we work for here in Charlotte, and that allows us to do these great podcasts. And also go over on Facebook, find it, WFNZ as well. That will be your headquarters for all news, Charlotte sports, and, of course, local college sports, which will involve, of course, our stuff. We will share it onto those pages as well. So that wraps it up for this edition of the podcast. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.